Hi guys, my name's Jemma Burns, and Charlotte will introduce herself in a moment. But I just wanted to start by acknowledging that we're on the stolen lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and want to extend my respect to all First Nations people here present, both and especially to elders past, present, and those emerging. Yeah, I think Charlotte and I are just going to have a bit of a conversation. We've thought about what. Actually, can I just start quickly by asking to see, or do you want to? I just wanted to see if you a show of hands of who's an artist manager, just to gauge who's in the room and what kind of info is most useful, and also maybe artists themselves. Any artists here? Okay, and any budding music supervisors? Okay, great. All right, so pretty much across what we're expecting. I just wanted to get a sense.
Yeah, that's great. Hi everyone, my name's Charlotte. I'm a local music manager. I sort of was really appealed to do this chat with Jemma because I studied film and I've also worked in the advertising industry, so I have a little bit of a crossover from all different perspectives. I think the thing that I noticed is when I sort of posted this online, I had so many friends write to me and say, that's my dream job, I want to be a music supervisor. So I think I'm going to ask for the budding music supervisors here, I'd like to know a bit about you, Jemma, and your journey into becoming a music supervisor, which I imagine is quite unique to various people. But
For sure, and we can talk more broadly about pathways later in the conversation. But I lived in London for 10 years since I was a teenager, and worked in experimental film and video arts centre, went on to study film, worked in record stores, just sort of did lots of peripheral jobs, as many as I could get into, being a kid with no experience. But then was very fortunate that a friend of mine's sugar daddy gave him 200 grand to make his first short film. So that was
that's how you do it.
So the first song I licensed was Cat Power's cover of Sea of Love.
Right,
But at the time, I didn't, this was 15 years ago or something. There are very few resources. There was only one book, and that is hilariously outdated now, obviously. But yeah, and then so I decided to move back to Australia. So when I came here, I again just sort of tried to go for those sort of peripheral jobs if I couldn't get the job, and worked at production companies and things, and then kind of landed a job at a music supervision company called Mana, who were kind of very well established because, really early on in Australia, there was only two main music supervisors. There was a woman who did, Muriel's Wedding and all the Priscilla and all of that, and this company I was working with. So I was able to see that there was a big gap for me in that company where to fill, because some of them really didn't know what they were doing. Just kind of basically, I guess what I'm getting at is I saw the opportunity to make myself indispensable, even though it was a really entry-level job to begin with. And so before long, I sort of took over the whole film and TV department, dabbled in advertising, but wasn't for me. And then after some time I got headhunted by another company and was there for 15 years, and now I've set up my own company.
It's funny because I've actually, this is just anecdotal, but I've just remembered how we met was I went to Big Sound when you talked about the company you used to work for. I went to Big Sound as a new manager about 10 years ago, and when we were doing those industry one-on-one meetings, I requested to meet with Jenna, and I was so excited that I could finally ask someone, which I'm sure all the artists here are feeling as well. How do you get a sync? How do you land a sync? So I think that kind of leads me to that question. I'm sure you were probably the one who gave me advice to just kind of reach out to everyone and anyone that I knew who had any connection to the industry, which is what I did. And having studied film now, 15 years on, a lot of the people I studied ended up becoming professional filmmakers, and some have done really well. At the time, everyone was just starting out. So what I did was I reached out to anyone I knew who was a filmmaker and said, hey, I'm managing this artist. I told them a little bit about his music, if you have anything that fits the bill. And one friend came back and said they were doing some work for, I think it was the Commonwealth Games at the time. and they had like a really small budget for an online ad, and that was the first sort of sync I ever landed, and kind of negotiated it myself and whatnot. But I think the main question from an artist's perspective and any managers here is what are the avenues to get a sync or to have access to someone like you? What's sort of the right path to follow? Because it seems like a really mysterious kind of world from the outside.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, obviously, there's different approaches. If you're an independent artist that isn't signed, I wouldn't advise. I mean, you can, but I don't think you're going to get very far just cold calling, sending a random email with your album to someone like myself or another music supervisor, purely because there's just I've got over 100,000 unread emails in my inbox. I'm not kidding.
That makes me feel physically ill as someone who's all for the inbox zero.
Only because you can imagine the sheer volume of people that are sending us stuff. So one way is to pair up with, if you can get signed to a sync agent. They basically don't take your copyrights. They don't control your copyrights. They do an admin deal with you where you still own everything, and they have relationships with people like myself. There are different types of sync agents. Some are more commercial, some are more skewed to what sort of things I work on. So I know which ones I'm actually going to pay attention to. They know how to target us. They know how much information to include in the email, all that kind of thing. And also just by by having a relationship with us, we might know, their aesthetic, what they like to deal with, whether we're even going to bother to open the email, because a lot of stuff's just not for me, which is fine. But because if you just send an email on your own, not only are you going to be lost in this huge list of other emails, but I have no way to contextualize you. I think that's really important, is context. So, if you think about it like either, if you become part of a label, part of a stable, that's a context where we know, okay, that they have a certain aesthetic or certain type of artists that they specialize in. Or, I mean, if you don't end up getting signed to a sync agent, I think the other piece of advice is really just to not only obviously hone your craft. That is absolutely the most important thing, a piece of advice I can give anyone. Don't expect to get all these deals if your music is just good. There's so much music out there that if, to capture anyone's attention, well, for me anyway, I'm looking for all the exceptional artists in every category, regardless of who they're signed to or whatever. So if you really hone your craft and make sure that you remain part of a community, whether it is a label or say you're part of a scene, or to use Doll Wave as an example, like if the best artists of that dreadful name are going to come to our attention anyway, because we're always looking for music. We've got our ear to the ground. So even if I don't know of your band in particular, but I know you're allied with these other bands that I am familiar with, I'll file it away in my brain, or I'll actually, if I have time, I'll actually download it and listen to it. So I think that's really important to remember. If you can't get, I don't know how easy it is to get signed to sync agents. I mean, I work with one a lot here in Australia, and I often recommend people to them. You could always try looking them up. They're called Nice Rights. And they also have a international wing as well. So the great thing about those guys is they're actually affiliated with my old company, and they've got loads and loads of relationships internationally and in Australia with music supervisors, advertising producers, all the gamut of people. But obviously, if you've got a publishing deal or a record label that's substantial, they'll probably have a branch that are targeting people like myself. There are also then small record labels that maybe don't have the capacity to have a licensing department. They may also be represented by a sync agent as a whole, or specific albums and artists. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting because it's like bringing back memories again. I think in hindsight, now knowing what I know as a manager, I did have a few sync agents reach out about artists that I work with. but I found the contracts to be so overwhelming. And as any of the managers in the room will know, it's quite difficult to convince an artist to pay for a lawyer to look over a contract. So I'm thinking now that I look back, there might have been a few missed opportunities from not really having like a full understanding of what a sync agent does and what sort of rights they're actually taking.
I mean, I think nice rights would probably be relatively straightforward to deal with, but I'm not sure. There's so many now. And yeah, I mean, obviously you want to make sure that if you are going for a sync agent, you want to make sure you're pairing yourself with someone with the right sensibility and look at their catalogue and, you know, I mean, I care about that kind of thing. I don't know. You know, for me, it's really important to be able to gauge the sensibility of an artist, regardless of their music, because that's, you know, there's so many, you can imagine when we're choosing pieces of music, there's so many factors that we've got to tick off. And at least if I can start by saying, okay, this is someone who I respect who's interested in this artist, so maybe I'll have a look, you know.
That's brings me to my next question, actually, which is sort of around what does, you know, you hear these stories about sync if you're talking to publishers or if you're talking to anyone who works in the sync field. I've heard over and over again that themes about home tend to be the most synced. Is there truth to that? Like, what does a brief kind of look like?
In the advertising world, for sure. I'm sure you're all aware, but like music supervision. Well, it can cover any moving images. So people do gaming. Gaming, I don't know a huge amount about, but advertising and then film and television tend to get lumped together. Advertising, they're looking for songs about sunshine and happiness and home, or, you know, coming back to you, or, you know, there's some pretty generic themes you can imagine. And there are a lot of artists who are specifically writing music tailored to that. If you want to, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, just look at what the current trends are. And, you know, there's usually some big artist at the time whose production style they're ripping off, you know, for all the car ads, or there's,
ukulele.
you know, thankfully we're moving away from mandolins and banjos.
I was going to say, wasn't there like a...
Banjos, rather.
I think there was a ukulele.
I'm pretty sure that was...
after,
I'm pretty sure I know who was responsible for that trend. My old boss. But yeah, briefs. I mean, briefs is a...
I'm interested to know about briefs because, like, it's not... I've never seen a brief for sync before. I used to work in the acting world, and I found that there was a lot of commonalities between briefs from casting directors, and it was always kind of like generic, like girl next door, and, you know, I'd look at the actors that we worked with and go, I don't really know what that means. But I imagine with music, it's like, you know, it's based on feeling, and it's quite subjective. And
well, there's really two briefs. There's briefing from us to music labels and publishers and sync agents. So, for example, I'm working on Heartbreak High. I'm just starting the new season. You know, we can follow on from an established aesthetic, but I'm still sort of thinking about the different characters' journeys and what kind of sound we're going to focus on for them. And so we'll send, especially for a project like that that's very music heavy, we'll create a really quite detailed library for them. So we'll in that instance, because I can quantify what we're looking for, I'll send a brief out to those labels and publishers that I enjoy working with and whose music is on brand. That's one thing. A lot of music supervisors send briefs out for everything. I don't work like that. I look for the music myself, and then if I'm struggling to find it in my own pool of music, then I might go to a label that specializes in 60s girl bands or whatever it is I'm looking for. I find oftentimes people want to be on our brief list and they want to pitch to us, but I don't understand how to brief. Occasionally we can do a specific scene that's like, okay, we're trying to replace this song. That's always a good start. They've got something to work with. Give them a bit of context. But really, especially in a feature film or something, how is someone from in some office somewhere supposed to really gauge exactly the specifics of all the nuances of what we're trying to do with
it's
the
sort
track.
Of your role.
So I get some of the companies get a bit shitty with me that I don't send more briefs out, but I only do it when it feels practical. And because also a lot of the time, you know, you're getting, especially if you're dealing with the majors, like you're getting some kid sending you a list of whatever their priority acts are, and or they might have spent a whole afternoon putting this list together for me, and I'm just like, did you even listen to it? So it's sort of a waste of everyone's time. So personally, I'm much more targeted with my briefing.
Yeah. I'm interested to know about the heartbreak. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the flip side of that is then where I'm getting briefed by
by director or
but that's more of a nebulous kind of process because we you know, there's no real there are certain stages in the process, but directors, you have to be very flexible because directors like to work quite differently, and producers, and you know, sometimes they'll want to almost wait till the picture's locked and then we'll sit down and do a spotting session together. I'll explain some of these. I might actually do a bit of a run through of how it all works because I realise some of this terminology might be foreign to some of you, but yeah, they might wait till there's an allotted time that we sit down together and go through the film and discuss each scene and what's required. But more often than not, we're kind of all coming at it together. We will have already, especially on a feature film, for example, where I'm like a film I've been working on at the moment. I've worked with the director a lot. He got in touch with me like 2 years before they were even fully financed. But because we worked very closely together, we were discussing the film and nutting out the aesthetic and the sound of the film. That's a whole long journey of back and forth playlists, and you know, eventually landing on quite different sounds to what we started out with. And then we start working on the actual film once pre-production starts and get more specific. But yeah, like on a project like that, it's very much a collaboration, and oftentimes on films like that, I'm almost more of a sounding board for the director. They're like, "Do you think my idea is good?" Like, yes.
It actually has nothing to do with music. They're just seeking reassurance. I wanted to talk to you about Heartbreak High because you mentioned it, and I think I had this a little bit further down in the list, but I absolutely loved the soundtrack and well chosen. And I know that there were a few questions around how sort of underrepresented segments of the community can find themselves a platform, like, you know, getting their music synced to a show as popular as Heartbreak High. And you did a really amazing job of that. So how did you find the music for that? Were they generally artists and songs you knew, or did you go searching?
Just to backtrack quickly to the sort of diversity sort of point, you know, I think as a company, we have a sort of, our remit is already, an unspoken thing is already to try and find opportunities for, you know, people of colour, queer community, whatever. You know, there's so much, we're spoilt for choice anyway. There's so much incredible music out there, so it's really not that hard. I suppose you've probably gathered from what I've been saying and some of the things I've worked on, I'm not the go-to mainstream music supervisor. So I probably, it's worth bearing in mind actually, because I know that a lot of more mainstream music supervisors probably approach things a little differently to me. But yeah, that's an unspoken kind of thing that we try to address anyway. But especially I saw Heartbreak High as like, who knew how successful it was going to be? But I was adamant from the outset that, you know, subcultures like the sort of Western Sydney drill artists and all those kind of scenes that are so poorly underrepresented in the mainstream media, and yet they're massive. They're huge in the UK. They're huge all over the place. You know, all these UK people didn't even know they were like islanders in Australia. You know, like they're that. You know, it's. So we were really adamant about making sure to include. I mean, we didn't even really have to make a big point of it. We just in our search, that's kind of what we gathered anyway. I suppose I just always have at the back of my mind. Apologies to any middle-class white men who are here right now, but I do. You know, if we can go for someone who's not.
I mean, and
we are really spoiled for choice.
It suited the characters in the film as well, where they're really, you know, representing some underrepresented communities as well. I mean, in the show. But I'm interested, like, are you Googling, like, Western Sydney drill artists, or do you already know some? Have you got people that you talk to?
Yeah. I mean, I work with a guy called Charlie Miller, who's wonderful young guy who's got a show on Triple R actually. But he, between us, we're just little music nerds anyway, and film nerds. So we're sort of, you know, and it's pretty easy to tap into these things these days. Like it doesn't take very long to go down a, you know, but yeah, what we'll generally do is spend lots of time gathering, like just trawling through everything and gathering all the like gems of each, you know, the bangers, the songs that are gonna. Because this is one thing that we're always trying to bear in mind as well is, without diluting the authenticity of the world we're creating or whatever, we're still trying to find an example of that genre that's authentic, but is actually going to still speak to a broader audience. So, you know, those songs that have a really amazing hook, or there's something about it that's just going to break through that, you know, I always think of the song, you know, the Eddie Current Suppression Ring song, you know, Which Way to Go. I've had the most, you know, old boomer women love it, all sorts of people love it that would not understand the rest of their catalogue, but that one song sort of sticks out. You know, it's that sort of thing that we're looking for.
Yeah. I had a question around, so I think when I did a post that we were doing this talk and I got a whole bunch of people writing to me saying, that's my dream job, I think people think of the job as exactly what you just described, being a music nerd, trolling through music, loving music, representing people, giving people a platform, which is all the stuff that kind of gives you butterflies. But I'm sure there's a lot more to the role. Do you want to talk us through what it is to sort of be a good music supervisor? Yeah,
I mean, I suppose, that is a common misconception. The number of people have said, I love film, I love music. I would be great. I'd be great at that.
I'm one of them, actually.
I mean, well, firstly, I think a lot of people who do music supervision come from the music industry, and they're like, you know, especially in LA, they're all like, I used to be an executive at Warner Chappell, and I know I can do all the deals and all that. And for me, it's like, well, it goes without saying that you need to be able to get songs for the best price and do the deals and whatnot. But I think because I also studied film, you know, my main focus is on my client, the director and the producer, and I want the two of them to trust me, the director to trust me creatively, and that I have a sensitivity to the nuances of what we're basically trying to figure out how to best tell a story. That's essentially that's a big part of the job. But and the producer wants to trust that I can pull off all the rest of it. So I suppose the qualities that, you know, if you want to be a music supervisor, obviously, you know, music nerd is a good starting point. But don't forget that you're also going to need to know about all the musics, everything, because every project is going to throw up. Like at some point I thought I'd get bored of the job, but every project I've thrown up has thrown up some new world that I've had to like quickly appear to be an expert in. Because the directors and producers want to feel confident that I know what I'm talking about. So yeah, there's the breadth of music knowledge. You also need to be really organised, and I mean, not everyone works how I do, but you're dealing with lots of tiny numbers and little things that it can actually make a massive difference if you've accidentally put the wrong duration for a cue, because pieces of music are charged according to how much of it you use. So little things like, oh no, you've accidentally forgot that there was an extra 15 seconds on that cue, and that's going to be another $20,000. Or you haven't captured all the wording for the rights somehow, and the whole film's being held up by the fact that you haven't included DVD rights on something. Or it could be, you've really got to have incredible attention to detail. And for me, it's also, I think maybe one of the reasons people like working with me is because I have a real attention to detail, also in terms of the world of the story and what music we're using and what were people in that period. Like I remember working on a film that was, all the characters were punks, and in the 80s in Melbourne, but I was like, yeah, but there were all the different scenes. There was the Crystal Ballroom over there, and then there were the like real fucking skinheads, sorry, over there, and there's, stuff like that. I really want to, because I think obviously what makes it helps with a great film is with the production values is that everyone is doing things to such a level of detail. A lot of it's getting thrown out. That's the other thing. You have to be very not precious. but if everyone's doing that level of detail, of course, you're going to come out with a really rich film. So, sorry, I digress. Yeah, the other qualities. I mean, there's maybe if I just quickly run through the basics of how it all works. You know, we get a script, read the script. I'll usually try and work out where music might go, whether it's like, it's a party scene, so there's probably going to be music playing, or whether it feels like a really beautiful montage, or so we sort of do a bit of a plot of how much music is going to be in the film, and then I might do a bit of an estimate budget just based on that, which is obviously something that only someone who's done it often could work out. But and then, if there's any music that needs clearing prior to filming, so say there's a scene where someone's dancing to a song, I always like to clear party music up front, because the number of directors are like, no, we can just put some music in afterwards. That punk film I was talking about, they played House of Pain in the party scene. I'm like, they're punks. And now you've got a scene full of people going like that. It's like, yes. So we'll have to clear music and organise it before they shoot, because obviously you're not going to get 300 people in a room filming if we don't have the rights to the song yet. But generally while they're filming, I just leave them alone. And then once you get into post, the director and the director and the editor generally like to have a bit of time to themselves. Depending on the project, I might have already supplied them with a whole bunch of albums, and especially if the director's just been giving me random reference tracks, which are often not necessarily tracks that we're going to use in the film, but for me, I take it as just a clue to their aesthetic and to their sensibility, and how they're wanting to approach this specific project. And then, once they've been editing for a while, then we start really looking at what the music needs of the film are, and more often than not, they want a lot more music than, like, the number of films I've worked on where they start off saying, it's not really a music film, and then next minute there's 30 songs in it. So then begins the long process of trying out songs against scenes, seeing how they work, and obviously, the skill set that's, the basic machinations of what we do isn't that complicated to get your head around, but there's just all the little things that can occur along the way, and also just the experience you need to know, because I'll just look like an idiot if I put forward a song that's either going to be too expensive, or the person's likely to say no, or the rights aren't available, or whatever it is. So every piece of music that I'm suggesting to the director, I like to have done some research. I need to figure out who they were signed to. Do we even know who owns the song anymore? All that stuff. Is it an expensive label? All those things, because I need to, at the same time, I'm also managing the budget, and it's this big moving jigsaw puzzle of, okay, well, if we spend all our money on that key scene, well, then we're going to have to, what are we going to do with the rest of the film? Or it's all of that, and working out what works creatively, and also, it's one thing for me and the editor and the director to get together and decide what we think works. Then you've still got the funding bodies, or the financiers and the network and all the other people who chip in, which is definitely the more frustrating part of the process. And then once that's all finished and we've decided what music's being used and everything's been locked off and they've done the mix and we know exactly how long each piece is going to be, then we have to request all the paperwork. Oh, I forgot a big part there was actually each song we look at, I have to inquire as to how much it's going to cost, and I have to negotiate with every single party. So one song might have 10 parties and 10 people involved. So I have to negotiate with all these different people, and we decide on a figure that between us we think is appropriate, and then they'll take that out to the actual management and get the approval from management, and then we know we're okay to proceed on that basis. But it's not until the very end of the film, the process, that we actually do the licensing. So that's another whole nother thing that you need to get your head around. I'm not a lawyer, but I've had to sort of wing it a little bit over the years, and I think I could probably call myself a paralegal by now. But so you've got the creative side of things, just the obvious music nerd stuff of knowing all the labels and who wrote the songs and how famous that songwriter is and all those little things that you need to know about. The creative sensibility, to the creative intuition and sensitivity, rather, to what the story actually needs. And then the negotiations, all of that side of things, and then all the licensing and managing the budget. So there's several different key components to the job that people aren't aware of.
Yeah. And it seems like it's, you have to be a lover of film as well, you know?
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, a lot of music supervisors are.
Yeah.
A lot of music supervisors aren't terribly well versed in film and television. And that's fine. You know, there are jobs out there for all types of people. I'm a film nerd, and I like working on some of the more highbrow stuff, I suppose.
Yeah. I think thanks for answering that. It's helpful for me to understand that process as well. It's as I said, it all feels like a bit of a mystery what goes on. I wanted to ask you a little bit about resilience. I can tell by the way you talk that you're a very passionate person with the people that you work with, and you know, obviously if you really believe in an artist, you want to work hard to get them a sync as well. And I've been on the receiving end of some of those phone calls from you with artists that I've worked with in a previous role that you were in, where some of them have gone ahead and some of them haven't. And often, you know, the figures can be really career defining. So you, as a manager, I've let myself sort of trail off thinking this could be it. This is, you know, this is going to allow us to quit our jobs, or this is, and then the artist will get shortlisted to the top 3, to the top 2, and then the director loves it and it's all going to happen, and then they went with someone else. And that's happened a few times. I think from a management perspective, now I go in thinking it's probably not going to happen. Don't bank on it at all. But how do you deal with sort of like delivering the rejection or the news of, you know, there's some resilience involved on your part, I imagine, as well.
Well, I suppose I've got a pretty thick skin having done it for so long now. But yeah, I would say that anything like a sync fee, just treat it as a bonus. Like, definitely don't bank on it, because the nature of film is that, you know, the director starts with, you know, we're giving the director all these options of possible, whether it's the color of the curtains, the piece of music, all the different, you know, we're giving them a whole palette to work with, and we have to make sure that the stuff that is in that palette is actually available. So oftentimes we will be seeking approval and clearing songs that are a selection of things that we're looking at. So I suppose, if you ever do get a sync inquiry, it's not until, it's one thing to get the approval. That's definitely still not a definite. It's only a definite once the actual final mix is finished. So I guess working in the area that I do, I'm quite used to the fact that whole scenes get dropped, actors who think this is the film that's going to make them don't make the cut, the whole gamut of things that could.
I think on a positive note, though, some success stories off the back of that is one of the artists that I work with has recorded a couple of songs to brief with the intention of them being pitched for, you know, as requested by you or the publisher. And then when it hasn't gone ahead, they've ended up releasing these songs and they've ended up being the most streamed songs. And these opportunities never would have come about if it wasn't for a very specific brief. For something to sound a particular way on a particular instrument. So, well,
I think that's an important thing, is to just, I'm not saying to not value and respect yourself and your output, but you have to be pretty, like, just have to roll with it with these things. Like, it's just the nature of this type of work, unfortunately.
And on the note of success stories, do you have any artists or songs that have been like your most ever synced artists or songs? Like anything that's come up again and again?
I don't know. I think that happens more in, to be honest, one of the people I was thinking of is actually Ainsley, who you manage. Just more as not so much as an artist that I sync a lot, but because we often also commission songs. Not often, but we do. That's a bit risky with what we do, because, you know, especially say the number of, sorry, I digress, but the number of producers who are like, I know, let's do a cover. Like, it's the first time anyone's thought of that. I'm always like, unless you're really willing to let the artist just go there and make it their own and then decide, it's better to use an existing cover, I suppose is what I'm saying. Because if we go to the expense of getting someone to record a track and then it just doesn't really embody the qualities of the original song, because why would it? It's going to have the same melody. It's going to have a very different delivery, instrumentation, whatever. So, but yes, we do sometimes commission people to write songs or to sing. I've asked Ainsley a number of times, who's one of her clients, because Ainsley just has such a gorgeous, timeless voice that I think is really classy and gorgeous, but it doesn't instantly make you think of a particular genre or scene that she's part of. She's just got this voice that works and is just... and she sings with a lot of depth, but not really with overall emotion, which I find... Actually, that's a good thing to flag. I actually find... I often get sent music by people and they say, I've got this really cinematic, moody music. For one thing, especially if it's instrumental, we may use it, but for the most part, something like that's going to be covered by the composer. I haven't spoken about working with composers. That's a whole other thing. I do that a lot. But most of the songs that I tend to use, like, sure, there'll be these moments from time to time where there's a big, emotional thing that's occurred. But for the most part, we're really looking at music, if it's vocal music, that's quite emotionally ambiguous. Because really, if you're going to put a sad song against a sad scene, they just amplify each other. It becomes silly. So the only times, like saying something like Heartbreak High, the only times there were two moments that were very gut-wrenching that we did use a big emotional song, but most of the other times it was really in a comical way, which is, yeah. So certain artists always sing with a certain vocal quality where they sound maybe like they're about to burst into tears or something.
Yeah, they're usually my favourite artists.
I know.
Love a ballad.
But it's worth bearing in mind that they're harder to sync, and so are songs that with lyrics that tend to be very literary. Like, I have used him before, but a good example is, say, someone like Robert Forster, who his songs are always very much telling a story, or it's quite hard. It depends. Sometimes, in some scenes you're going to place a song where the lyrics aren't that pertinent, and some directors don't care about lyrics. I don't care about lyrics, but a lot of directors do, and they want the lyrics to somehow vaguely speak to what's going on in the scene without being on the nose. And it's quite hard if you're really featuring a song over a sequence, if it's telling a story that kind of takes you out of the story itself.
Yeah, I know what you mean by that. I was consulting with an artist who was telling me that one of her songs, I think, was like one of the most synced songs on Sky Sports, because it had been synced to so many sporting ads, which is probably not something that she would have anticipated when writing the song, which I imagine is more like a love song sort of thing. But I guess thinking about that as an example, it's quite ambiguous, so you could kind of place it anywhere. It's not so literal that it has to be in one particular field, Yeah. I just wanted to ask you about exposure and fees and whatnot. I can use sort of a real life example. One of the artists that I've worked with who would usually charge at quite a high fee has in the past discounted in particular circumstances where they might be working with an upcoming director who doesn't have much of a budget. It's quite difficult to know when to discount a fee, what's going to give an artist exposure. Obviously, there are these success stories of artists that you hear for the first time on Heartbreak High. I'm interested to talk to you about how that sort of shifted in the record label world as well. But I want to know from your perspective, when you're working with something that, possibly doesn't have a huge budget, how do you know when to sort of convince an artist to go for it?
To be honest, I almost never pull that card.
Great.
Heartbreak High is one of the few that we didn't know how big it was going to be, but I was fairly certain that it was going to at least be good for some of the emerging, more underground acts that we were working with. I can pretty safely say that if a producer came to you as a manager or as an artist and said, look, we've got this project, we've only got this much money, but it's going to be great exposure. I mean, you just have to do your homework a little bit, I guess, and see, well, is it a project? You might give your song away for cheaper because it's a subject matter that's dear to your heart or something. That's fine. But if they try to pull the exposure, it really depends what it is. But I don't think in Australia, locally, I don't think there's that many projects that are going to really. I don't pull that card. But I'm also always playing this dance of wanting to get the best possible music for the project, obviously, but also wanting to make sure that I'm not ripping people off. And sure, sometimes I'm like, we've only got this much money. What do you think? If you've only got that much money, you've only got that much money. Yeah. It depends. It depends on the project. But but then, especially with all the publishers and people I deal with frequently, they know then that if I come to them with a smaller budget project, that really is all the money I've got, and that on the bigger projects, it all works out in the end.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think if someone randomly comes to you, saying that, just jumping back a bit to what you were saying before about when you first started out and how you were contacting all the film people I don't know if there's many budding composers in the room or people who are wanting to actually break into that area, but I think that's really pertinent advice because when I was coming up, I found short filmmakers who were sort of at the same level of career as I was, and we sort of nutted it out together. And I would just be calling the equivalent of APRA in the UK all the time to figure out what I had to do next. And we sort of say if you're wanting to be a composer and you go and reach out to some of the VCA students and stuff, they're probably pretty amazing, some of them. They definitely are. Some of the short films that end up in MIF, they've got very professional crews, and so it can be a great opportunity. I mean, obviously short films are a kind of a calling card for everyone involved to some extent, aren't they? So I just think it's really good to ally yourself with people who are at the same stage as you. And if I hate the expression back the right horse, but if you have maybe the director that you're working with as they come up, they'll take you up with them,
Totally. I think, I give this advice out often, regardless of whether we're talking about sync or not. I think it's so important within the music industry to find your people and find your community and grow together.
And people who you can have a relationship with where you're not afraid to be like, oh, what are we doing next?
Yeah, exactly. I've got a friend who's a photographer who's also a filmmaker, and we worked on a lot of things together. So he might take some press shots, but we both dip into this corporate advertising world as well. So then he's pitching Ainsley's music, for example, when he's working with Tourism Australia. So it's sort of like you're saying, goes around, comes around when you find people who you really click with and collaborate with.
It actually just reminded me, you were talking earlier about how to get music into films and what's the best route, and I was talking about sync agents, but I also made me think one of the other really important people in the process is the editor. So if you do your homework and maybe figure out who are some of the really key editors and producers. Most of the time, if you were to send your music to a producer I'm working with, they would just send it on to me, and But in any case, I think finding out who are the best production companies that are making the kind of content that you think is really interesting, just send it. They don't get targeted as much as we do with music, so they actually do sometimes pay attention, and certainly editors. Because editors are really at the coalface. They're the first person who's sitting there with the director, nutting the whole thing out. And oftentimes we have a slightly contentious relationship, but they're the ones who are, just nutting it out with the director, trying things out, seeing what's working. So if they've got if you've sent them something that they think's cool, I'm sure they'll keep it. I mean, I come across editors who I've worked with 10 years ago, and I work on a project, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure that song came from me 10 years ago, but they do keep their own. They obviously have their own libraries. So they have their own stash. So yeah.
I was going to ask you just back to the sort of fees versus exposure thing. I had a friend call me recently who's self-managed, and she had that scenario where someone who she knows who now works in film presented her with an opportunity and just said they've got a $5,000 budget, and she called me and went, "Is that good?" And I couldn't really give her any context because there's a lot of different factors for a budget. So I was sort of saying to her from what I know, and that's really from looking at the terms and conditions on what deals we've done before or through publishers. There's the term, there's the territory, there's the length of the term, there's where it's going to appear. What are all of those line items that you're looking out for?
This is the boring bit, but I'll tell you anyway. I mean, when I send a request out for a quote, obviously we're giving a bit of information about the project, who's involved, who's funded it, kind of how serious is the project essentially. Is this just some little home personally funded project, or is this something, being made for a network or whatever? And then we describe how the song's being used, like what's going on in the scene. Sometimes I have to get a bit creative. No, sometimes the publishers, the majors, surprisingly sensitive still about things like sex. They really they almost won't take things out for approval if they're worried that it's a bit lewd. Anyway,
weird.
That's the side note. But yes, describing the way the song's being used, how much of the song we're planning to use, and then when it comes to the terms that you're describing, we're sort of, for film and television, we're always asking for the ability to screen this project around the world in perpetuity. Actually, a lot of people are asking for the universe now. And then the media is basically describing what formats the production can be displayed on. So it could be anything from all forms of television, non-theatrical, except including film festivals, trains, planes, prisons, all the things. Basically, we're describing all the media that can possibly be used. But in advertising, it's usually broken down, and it's much more of a headache. I'm so glad I don't have to deal with that, because they might be saying, we want to play it on the radio for 6 weeks, and we only want it on television for 3 weeks, but it's going to be online forever, or something like that. So you've got to somehow quantify those things and work out what the fee would be. Whereas for us in film and television, it's just all media. For film, it's all media that can ever, even future technologies. And for television, it's all media excluding theatrical rights. And if someone's... So obviously the fees are higher the more rights you include. So theatrical rights are much more expensive than just for television. But figuring out how much something should cost really comes from years of experience, knowing that firstly, you're taking into account all those things I've just described, but then you're also taking into account the fact that this artist was really big 5 years ago, but no one's interested in them anymore. That means the fee would have gone down a lot. Or maybe they're an artist that's a heritage act that's never not going to be famous, like the Frank Sinatras of the world. They're the most expensive, and American R&B and hip hop artists, they're also the most expensive. Where are they in their careers? Who's involved? Who are they signed to? Obviously, if someone's signed to like the likes of Remote Control, or they have to deal with the people back at Beggars as well. But generally, they can see the value in a project, and the fact that an artist might actually be really interested in it, rather than the majors who are such gatekeepers. Like I've worked on projects where the artist found out that the publisher said no to the fee, and they were extremely pissed off because they were really passionate about it. But saying that, I also get asked all the time to appeal to people's better nature and to say, well, this is a film about, you know, how we dealt with AIDS, and isn't this artist gay? Won't they be interested? So, well, it's sure we can try, but it's firstly we have to get through the gatekeepers, and B, like, do you know how many people probably ask them that every year? So there's a lot of factors that we're kind of taking into account. And that's why sometimes on projects we get asked if we're doing, that's a fun term, most favoured nations. I don't know if any of you have heard of that.
I was actually going to say this next, is that it was one of those like industry conversations that I've just had to wing in the early days, because they would, like, the publisher would be like, it's MFN. And I'd be like, okay. Like Googling what is MFN.
Apparently it's a term that's actually used in other forms of law.
Yes,
it's a very weird one. It basically means that both parties need to get the same amount. So I'm sure this is 101 for you guys, that there's, for every song there's 2 copyrights. There's the recording, which we call the master, which is the performing artist's performance that's been recorded and is controlled by a record label. On the other hand, you've got the publishing rights, which is the composition, so it's more like the IP, whoever. And so the publishing's in a sense more valuable, because whatever iteration of that song, you're always going to be using the publishing right. So so the idea is that, say song A has a record label and 3 publishers who are going to get split pro rata amount of their fee. They want to both be getting the same amount, essentially. So if one of them quotes higher, the other fee also goes up. So, which is very annoying for us, because it might be, you know, say it's $750 per 30 seconds, and now they've gone up to $1,000 per 30 seconds. Well, that amount now means it's $2,000 per 30 seconds for us, and we're using 3 minutes of the song. So that little bump up anyway. We'll often get asked if a song is most favoured nations across an episode or across a series, and I'm like, what are you talking about? I can't believe people even do that. There's too many variables. You can't say that all the songs are going to cost the same price. There's all the variables I've just described, where they're at in their career, who they're signed to, how we're using the song. Is it really featured? Is it just bubbling away in the background? All these things. So there's, as you can see, there's many different factors that we take on board when we
and if I was that person who, you know, received a sync offer for $5,000 and didn't know who to turn to, who should I turn to? A lawyer? Would I take it to a sync agent and say, hey, I've been offered this?
Good question.
Definitely not a manager. I wasn't really able to
I wonder whether, I mean, I would say it's interesting. So I was trying to think of any resources that are out there, and obviously I'm not super clued up because it's not something I rely on anymore. But I would say when your first port of call is APRA, they're there to help, and they're very helpful. Whatever you're doing. The same, that's how I figured it out in London as well. I just called the equivalent. I believe APRA has a lot of resources about how to go about things. I wouldn't even be surprised if they've got sort of template agreements and things.
Yeah, I think they might, actually.
Yeah, and if you don't have anyone else to ask, you may as well ask APRA what they think of the fee. Although, to be honest, I don't know how much they know about fees. They know about all the other things.
That's kind of what I was thinking about with lawyers as well. Like, it seems like it's such a niche to really understand, like, what an indie film budget is versus what a major sort of budget is. I guess you could rely on a lawyer who's had a lot of experience in looking over sync deals, right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know if a lawyer's. I don't know if a lawyer's necessary at that stage. Maybe to look over the agreement, but look, I guess my advice would be if you are getting a request to use a song or your artist's song, firstly, there's usually some wiggle room. It's always worth asking. It's no shame. You just ask them, is this your maximum budget? Is this the most you can offer? We sort of thought maybe we'd be getting a little bit more. You know, there's really no shame in asking. There's no set fees. So, but then again, do bear in mind that certain projects, that's all they've got. So, you know, just be realistic. I mean, if it's a big commercial project like a Netflix show or something like that, you can always ask for a higher fee. Saying that, another very key piece of advice I would give is you also don't want to be difficult with people. Like, I'm not saying you should be a pushover, but as soon as as I said, there are just so many musicians, everybody in the world. If you're going to be a nightmare to deal with or be bitchy or pushy or whatever, probably just going to move on to the next person. It's as simple as that. So you want to be amenable as well as being, standing your ground if you think that's warranted. But so if you're asking for some more wiggle room, if this is like, say, one of your first times you've been approached or something, don't be too pushy about it, obviously, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask you about, we talked a little bit before about sort of like moral alignments and, maybe an artist will reject a massive sync because it doesn't align with their moral compass. Maybe it's a gambling ad or something like that. Does it go both ways when you're sort of like searching these like underground scenes, for example, or an area, a subgenre of music that you're not that involved in from a different location? Are you also finding that you're having to do a little bit of research on like the personality of the artists that you're platforming as well, on the off chance that they've been cancelled before or anything?
To some
like
extent, yeah. I mean, I know it's a whole debate about separating the artist from their biography, but I personally won't touch, people who have been in questionable moral situations.
Yeah. I think this all the reason I'm asking is for the budding music supervisors. I think this all adds to your reputation. I feel like you've built a career where the collaborators that you work with sort of know who you are, know your morals, the types of music you love and the types of film you love and you stand for, and I think that's probably what makes you really good at your job. Yeah.
I mean, I have had one or two I don't know whether to tell the stories.
Should we stop recording temporarily and have a safe space?
No, there was I worked on the film Lion, and there was this amazing early 90s Bollywood song that I was just obsessed with, and I love the music video, except it is kind of about boys pestering women on the bus to begin with. That was the beginning of the film.
Very niche topic.
And well, the chorus is take it easy policy. That's what they're like just take it easy, babe, kind of thing. The video clip and the whole thing is so amazing. But right at that time, all this stuff was going on in the news in India, and so we were in a bit of a quandary there. We just chose to use a section of the video where they were just dancing, and they went. We could, yeah. It's literally one of the best things on the internet. Yeah. That's apart from the fact that at the very beginning they're pestering the girls. It was the early 90s in India. Do you want? Have you got many more questions, or would you like to? Should we throw it out to the audience?
I just have one very boring question. What sort of? I know I manage a couple of producers as well, and I always make sure that the producers will provide the artist with instrumentals when they finish an EP or an album. Because I know from the perspective of a manager that that's been something that sometimes I haven't had on hand when a publisher's been in touch with me to say, this is going to go ahead, but we need the instrumental. Yeah. What sort of, just from an admin perspective, what's a little package that an artist should have? I imagine lyrics, instrumentals.
Lyrics are definitely good. I mean, we don't call on them all that often, but sometimes we need them for the postscript where it's for closed captioning and stuff like that. Definitely always worth saving an instrumental of anything you make, because that does get asked of a lot, especially because, maybe we want to drop the lyrics for a minute because they're interfering with the dialogue, and then we bring it back up again, or things like that. We do get asked. I'm finding producers are more and more entitled when it comes to stems, which I'm always like, really? I don't know if you should be asking for stems from an artist, but they do a lot, and that's really for when they're mixing, and it might be because they want to keep the vocal, but it's really tinny and interfering, or the high end is interfering, whatever. They just want to be able to mix it in such a way that it works with the scene.
I think I found that producers, I don't know if there's any producers in the audience, but like to know what is happening with the stems. Yeah. Is someone remixing the thing that I've just poured my heart and soul into?
I would say as a standard, you should have instrumentals for sure. Stems, I don't believe that producers should be so pushy about insisting on stems. If the artist wants to provide them, great. But I don't think that if someone comes to you and asks for stems, that you should feel like you have to give it to them.
Yeah. And
that's just my opinion.
Waves over MP3s, like higher quality.
Well, no, when you're just sending out whole albums and things like that, MP3s are fine. And then if a song actually gets selected to be used, then we'll request a WAV file off you. For we will need broadcast quality for sure. Yeah.
Great.
I mean, as you can imagine, I can waffle on about all of this endlessly. So if anyone has any specific questions, that I don't know what gaps in your knowledge there are. So feel free to just yeah.
This has been amazing. Thank you both so much.
No worries.
I'll bring you a microphone so everyone can hear you.
I'll just finish this one.
I'm all good. Cheers, thanks.
Amazing. Hello again. Thank you both so much. This has been amazing. I just wanted to know a little bit more in terms of, thank you so much for breaking down really the process of how you go through syncing items. I would love to know just a little bit more in terms of a day in your life. Like, is it mostly admin heavy, or do you go on set? Like, how does that kind of look for you?
I tend to avoid going on set. It's not for me. I used to like to go on whenever there'd be a party scene, and then one film I worked on, I was like pretending to be a DJ in the Berghain, and I was like, yeah. And then I just basically pretended to put a record on and off over and over again for several hours. It's not. No, so yeah, no, I don't really need to be on set. I can sometimes, but no. Mostly I'm responding to a million emails about how to navigate projects and what's, whether it's from the producers and what are we going to do about this scene, and we don't have enough money and we need it to be turned around today, or but I work on such a variety of scale of projects as well. Like the bigger projects tend to be quite slow moving. Like they'll be editing for a week and I won't notice the difference most of the time. So it can really vary. I mean, sometimes we have what's called a spotting session where we'll get to, which is it's really fun if it's a good project. So basically the producer, director, composer, editor, sound team and us will all get together and watch the episode or the film, and we'll sort of stop at each point where there's been they'll usually have temp music while they're editing, which is a whole other thing to talk about. But yeah, we'll basically break down every little moment and discuss together, which is really fun to get a sort of a consensus, because film is a collaborative medium, obviously. Just to work out, again, like I keep saying, how to best tell the story. Is music overbearing here? Is it distracting? Is it taking us out of the story? Do we need to emphasize the sounds more, or whatever it is? So we work our way through the whole project, and then we all go away and get to work. Although a lot of the time, it's a bit chicken and egg. Like they'll be editing, they're not quite ready to show anyone yet, but they'll send us random scenes. We should be familiar with the story anyway from the scripts. So we're kind of working on individual scenes that the editors are maybe having trouble with, or sometimes they're just so under the pump. That's actually a good point, that we often have more creative control or creative input on TV shows than feature films, especially when it's a feature that's maybe a writer, director, or someone who's just been living and breathing the project, and they have a very clear idea of what they want. Not all directors do, but they often do. Whereas on television, it's more of a producer's medium, because as you probably know, there's just lots of different directors doing different episodes, and the producer's the one who's overseeing the whole thing. They have the creative vision. Although that model's changing a bit more now to the showrunner model, which is often the person who's created the project, and so they have a lot more of a sort of executive producer role, and they're more it varies, but yeah, because TV's so much faster, more often than not they're just like, you take care of the music, and the editors might be like throwing things in that we've provided them with, and they're like, they're just also, everyone's so under the pump, so they're quite happy for us to make the call. And of course, in every scene we might suggest several options. They'll be someone else is making the ultimate call, but we're really driving the thing. So yeah, the day can involve answering a million emails, filling out spreadsheets, listening to endless music, reading endless scripts. Although, you know, when friends message me at 11 o'clock at night to say, "Are you still working?" I'm like, well, I'm basically dancing around my living room to some music just to test out how, you know, how
To
it's
test
going
out
to
the
work.
party scenes.
So
I was going to ask you on that note. I imagine you've probably synced heaps of music and you go through like management and record labels and publishers and whatnot. Is it more common that the artist doesn't know who you are in your living room dancing and probably making their career?
Probably. There's often times where I've synced someone who I know. I'm like, should I tell them that was me? I don't know.
Yeah, you should. I think credit where credit's due.
Yeah.
It can be
No,
like
it's true.
quite
There's quite a
career-defining.
remove. Yeah. Especially when you get to bigger and bigger artists where you're dealing with their agents and their managers and you're not actually dealing with them directly. Yeah.
Well, I can tell you from the perspective of a manager and working very closely with artists, it's like a really exciting email to receive when a sync offer
I know
comes through.
we get, obviously I get a bit blasé about it sometimes because I've been doing it for so long, but no, it's true. And I have to say, Heartbreak High especially, it was so gratifying to just see how excited, you know, even like Princess Nokia and Genesis Owusu was like, you know, lol, someone's put my whole album in the show, you know. It's like, but just to see what a thrill it was for all these artists to be not only to get a sync, but to be in this particular project, obviously. Yeah.
Are there any other questions out there?
Yeah.
Hello. Sorry, I'm new
Hi.
here. I'm very little, so thanks so much for the chat. Just a question: when reaching out to, say, sync agents or even yourself as a supervisor, is there a standard or preferred way to send music?
It's definitely better to send download links or actual files. SoundCloud links and Spotify links aren't worth sending because we essentially take the files and put them into our own library. And then they're actually really there to hand. We tag them and put all the notes and things, and also that way they're able to be actually placed in the edit against the pictures. So yeah, that's the main thing I would say. The other thing I would say is less is more. Like, don't put more than, like, if it's an album, just send one album, maybe two. Better to, just make it as sort of succinct and precise as possible. A little bio is fine, but I don't want to know when they started learning piano at 3 years old. You know, like it's not really relevant. But saying that, you know, everyone knows in a good blurb, you know, name dropping or some sort of context. Again, it's all about context. Like if you can say in your email, so and so who's played with blah blah. You know, I might not have heard of your artist, but I've heard of the people that they've played with. Although keep it classy. Like some people go too far with that. But does that sort of make sense?
Like I've heard of platforms like Disco before. Do we have to use Disco? Or
No, but it's definitely becoming a kind of a industry standard for sure. Okay. It's just good for us because previously I had to download everything. I just had this endless folder of downloads that I still then had to do something with. Whereas with Disco, I can just click that it adds to my Disco library. Just goes straight in, and it also gets auto tagged, which
with
is
all
really
the
useful.
metadata. And everything.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Make sure any files you're sending through, make sure they're well tagged. It's really annoying to have to go in and like tidy up, like as a minimum, you know, obviously name, song name, artist name, year is really good because obviously we're often working on things that are time specific. Genres, keep it fairly broad, I would say, because genres are just a big mishmash these days anyway, aren't they? And any context is always good.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Samuel Gaskin, and I have a very important question. If you were an artist making fierce and fabulous music, that might be the perfect fit for a show like Heartbreak High, but you didn't have a sync agent and you happened to be in the room with the music supervisor of that show, how would you get them to have a little listen to your music?
Probably, I suppose I could probably leave my email address at the door, or you can all just of course, if you meet someone, you can send them. There's no.
This question is just for me, not
you
everyone
can't.
else.
I'm not saying you
No
can't
joke.
send me your albums. I'm just saying you're much likely to get. We just get unbelievably busy, and there's just this unbelievable amount of music that we get sent every day. So, by all means, send it. But I would really go after a sync agent if I was you, because, like I said, they know what we want. They know what we're looking for.
And you've got 100,000 emails in your inbox.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to get around.
Yeah. I mean, if you, I don't know.
What was the sync agency called?
Nice Rights.
Nice Rights, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I feel like that seems like a good
Julia
pathway
Wilson
to.
and Jen.
Yeah,
Taunton.
okay, yeah. I've not worked with them before.
Mm.
But it seems like you've got a trusted relationship with them.
Yeah.
So, for example, if
Yeah,
they were
yeah.
sending your music.
And they're great
To
'cause
Jemma,
they've got
that
yeah, exactly. So they might then include your music in a playlist of music that's similar, that or is a certain mood, or like here's a bunch of new grime artists or whatever it is.
I'm just asking so we can giggle about this years later down the track when you
True.
sync my music. Thank you.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. Thank you so much, Jemma, for talking.
No
It's
worries.
been very insightful. I've learned a lot. I suppose my question was kind of half answered before, but I was just curious about how you sorted your library of music and how that works with briefs you're sent. Like, if a directors are asking, if they ask, I guess the metadata kind of helps with that.
Yes.
But would they be asking for we want reggae for the scene, or do we want ambient piano sounds? Do you sort more on feel or through genre or?
A bit of both. Like we're having that conversation right now on Heartbreak High. Do we send them genre playlists, or do we send them mood playlists, or do we send them? You kind of want a bit of both, I suppose. It depends whether we're replacing an existing song that's not available. We might be. Actually, to be honest, often when that happens, the first instinct is to try and find something as close to the thing that we're not using. More often than not, I'm like, let's just start again. Let's, no two songs are the same, so there's no point. And also, if it's a really famous song, everything that you come up, this is a bane of my life. When they're editing, they'll throw in all these massive songs to send. Then they send it off to the network. Look how great our show is, and then I'm set the task of replacing all those songs, and everything's going to feel like a compromise. Obviously, they're not going to be happy with anything after Prince or whoever it is. So yeah, I think when you're sending things through, or when you're cataloguing things, a bit of both. I think you want to say a little bit about the mood, for sure. Mood is really important. Tempo a little bit, has it got a really driving pace? I mean, when we tag things, it's all that sort of thing. I'm tagging, are they Melbourne? Are they 80s? Are they post-punk? Or are they whatever? Any little bits. I mean, there's sort of obviously the obvious fields that you tag, but then I also write notes sounds like, a lot of artists. There's an artist I was listening to last night that's a cross between Patti Smith and PJ Harvey, or guys. I was playing it as someone in the audience last night. Yeah, because I don't think it's necessary. I mean, it depends. Obviously, sometimes we really do. The scene may call for really delicate piano music, but I think on the whole, I think genre is less important than pace and mood.
Don't you think also that there's something that can't be captured in metadata as well, which is
totally, which is why you have to go through.
Yeah.
But it also means, the other thing is that every project is a. I keep using the word context, but every project is a different context, and even music that I know really, really well, I still have to listen to it again through the lens of that specific scene, and how is it interplaying with what's going on in that scene and the characters. So the whole thing is quite time-consuming, as you can imagine, which is why I haven't gotten to all my 100,000 emails.
Thank you.
Hi, Jemma.
Hi.
How did you get Mariah Carey in Beau is Afraid?
Oh man, that was the bane of my life for about 2 years. Well, Ari Aster, the first thing he said to me when we caught up was, if you do one thing, you have to get this Mariah Carey song for me. It's, I don't know if any of you have seen Beau is Afraid, but there's a pretty freaky sex scene that goes on. And obviously Mariah Carey's like such an enigma, even though she's so famous. Like, how can you second guess? Is Mariah Carey into weird art films, or is she into, like, who knows? Can we appeal to her that this is a cool, you know, A24 art film? We kind of went down that route, but I kind of cut to the chase because I've been in similar situations with very major artists before, and I find the most effective thing is to there was a whole Variety magazine interviewed me specifically about this one thing that I got Ari Aster to write a letter to Mariah Carey. So it's not just business dealings. It's like artist to artist. He kept asking me, "Is it nice enough?" I'm like, "Oh, it really literally looked like a letter from Variety." You know, when writing, "Thanks, Grandma, for having me for the weekend." It was quite funny actually. But so we sent the letter off, and because it was a sex scene, and something weird happens during the sex scene, we sent the actual scene itself. And I couldn't say this in the article, but our team watched it 30 times. So I don't know if one person just got really into it or what was going on. But
the gatekeepers.
It was funny because we got some very weird messaging from her team that didn't quite add up, and we were really unsure what was going to happen. And then even when I did get it approved, the fee was astronomical. Managed to get them down a little bit. You don't have much wiggle room with someone like that. The label were just like, "It's Mariah Carey, Jemma. Like, it's one of her most famous songs. You still get it." So I can't tell you how it all ended, but it happened, and I was really excited to also say in the same article. We also got John Zorn. He gave us. John Zorn was like, "No, I just don't. I'm not interested in licensing." And I was like, but it's Ari Aster. And he was like, "Oh, sweet, you know, love that guy." And, you know, obviously found him to be a kindred spirit. And yeah, it was pretty funny to do an article that mentioned both Mariah Carey and John Zorn. But it's definitely like dealing with, say, local artists on a local TV show compared to dealing with major artists on very high profile projects. It's just a whole nother ball game. You know, you're just expected to be able to somehow get in touch with these people and somehow go through some back door, and it can be quite terrifying.
I was just thinking, like, if you're the label person for Mariah Carey, are you just going, "It's Mariah Carey," just on a daily basis to every inquiry you get?
I mean, luckily the publisher, who's a massive Ari Aster fan, the guy I was dealing with, you know, we had a few giggles on the phone about it, but then we're all strictly business in the email sense. But they were all very helpful, yeah. Americans like to be helpful, I've noticed. They like to pay it forward.
I just have a kind of like two-parted question.
Sure.
Just one will probably lead to the other. Firstly, what does it represent? What does international representation by WME mean?
They're my agent.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So WME's there's like 3 big talent agents in America, and they represent like directors and actors and music supervisors and composers and stuff. So they're my agents. So they put me forward for projects, and people are supposed to deal with them.
They also work with artists, booking artists for shows and festivals and whatnot, so you might come across their name again in the music world.
Yeah. And the second question is, if somebody was to start a sync and licensing company today, what have you learnt among the challenges along the way in building your own sync and licensing company?
That it takes time. It takes time to build relationships. It takes time to earn people's trust. Like I said, the basic machinations of what we do each day isn't that hard to get your head around. But there's just all the wisdom that comes with experience, whether it's, you know, how best to address an issue, how best to approach an artist, what the fee should be, the whole gamut of, you know, and also just, I think having the right sensitivity creatively is probably potentially quite an inherent thing that people have, but it's certainly also something that you can hone. So that skill of, you know, really being able to intuit what piece of music is going to work really well, that's something that you get better and better at over time. So I think really, unfortunately, as with a lot of careers, you just got to be really patient and chip away at, like, actually that's something I hadn't addressed, is like how you would go about trying to be a music supervisor in this day and age. And it's there's really no direct path, but I would say, as I was sort of suggesting before, you know, any of the sort of peripheral roles, if you can't get a job assisting a music supervisor, try working at a production company in post-production, or and then maybe work at a record label or a publisher, and just see how all the people we deal with all the time, how they all work. It's going to be incredibly beneficial then. Or if you'd gone about and done that and then come to me and asked for a job, I'm much more likely to hire you than, I don't know.
I think also I was going to say, having been on the receiving end of your phone calls and whatnot, I think what you mentioned before about building relationships is so important, because I think within the industry side of things, there's kind of like the networking, which really feels like plugging into people's contacts. And then there's people like you who love music, who love film, who love storytelling. And that becomes very obvious within a few seconds of talking to you. And I think that that's probably what contributes to the longevity of your career and your reputation. So it's probably really important to hone into storytelling and collaborating. And
yeah, I mean, I suppose it depends what your intention is with the company. Like, are you just really very much about the business, which is, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're like all about, like, let's gather a bunch of unsigned artists, make a catalogue, pitch them to people, great. Just work out what your strengths are. What's your intention? What area are you really, like? Is the creative side really what you want to focus on? And if it is, unfortunately, with anything, like if you want to be a well-known cinematographer or an editor who actually has a strong voice in a project, it takes time. You've got to earn the respect. You've got to earn the respect and the trust of the people that you're working with. So yeah, depends. I mean, I made a very intentional. Sorry, if you had a question. No. Yeah. Go.
I was just going to ask. So you've spoken a bit about, you know, some advice you'd give to someone trying to become a music supervisor. Sort of in two parts, but if you were to, you know, look at hiring someone to be a music supervisor who doesn't have, you know, all that much experience, what are the kind of things that you would be looking for? And also, this is thinking about the state of music supervision in Australia compared to maybe in the UK or America, and you know, what sort of differences there might be as well.
So as far as what I'd be looking for, I mean, for me, creative sensibility is really important. So I'd need to make sure that it's someone who is allied with me in some sense. Like, I've currently got two people working with me who have quite different, you know, one's much more up on the new music, one's much more up on and she's much more involved in punk scenes and stuff like that, whereas the other one's more involved in, you know, likes everything from K-pop. We just have quite a whole gamut of genres that are our area of expertise, but just knowing that the person has the sort of sensibility that's going to marry with mine is super, super important. And then, but that's all well and good. I've made the mistake of hiring people before because they have great taste in music and they maybe had a radio show or something like that. But it's so much more than that, obviously. Realizing that it's a really fast-paced environment and you have to be really diligent and neat and proficient at all the admin side of things as well, because we're constantly relying on this information. It needs to be up to date, it needs to be accurate, it needs, you know, all these things. Obviously someone who understands a little bit about the licensing side of things is good, but obviously that can be taught. I'd probably be more interested in someone who's got a really in-depth knowledge of, like, all the record labels and, like, you know, I actually was thinking about it the other day. It's kind of a shame now with streaming. You know, when I was coming up and everyone had CDs and vinyl, you actually, while you were listening to it, you actually looked at the liner notes and noticed who wrote it, and you actually noticed who produced it or what label or publisher and things like that. You were just absorbing this information constantly. Whereas you can see a bit of that now, but that just being savvy about labels and that kind of thing's good. Yeah, look, the publishing and that kind of side of things, it can be taught. That's not probably so much an issue for me. It depends what level I'm looking at. I mean, we're obviously talking about an entry-level job, right? I would still suggest, though, that it would definitely be great if you got some experience at other kind of, like I said, other sort of peripheral, tangential in companies like record labels and whatnot. Working in a record store is always a good one. Do they exist? I'm joking. I mean, working in a record store was great because you're just constantly listening to music all day, right? And you're constantly filing. I don't know, do people file CDs anymore? It's records now, isn't it? Yes. Sorry, that wasn't very. It's just really hard to pinpoint. But you need to be able to prove that you can work in a really fast-paced, demanding environment and not get upset if they don't like your song suggestions and things like that.
Yeah, it sounds like what I've gleaned from this. It's not just about going, I think I'd be great at choosing a song for a film. You have to be really attention to detail and understand the admin side of things as well.
Yeah. And just in terms of like the music you suggest, like you want to have, like I keep talking about earning trust, but you know, when I first started, especially when I was dealing with a director that I hadn't actually met in person, we were just emailing and I'm sending them these random playlists and they're like, who's this chick that's sending me, you know, I need to feel like the people who are working with me are on the same creative wavelength, and then the people my clients then need to feel like some sort of kindred spirit there as well. Otherwise, they're just not going to be open to the ideas. I've worked with directors before where I'm the music supervisor, I'm sending them ideas, and I can tell they're not even listening to them because they're like, who's this person? I don't know, you know. Why would you? Sorry. Oh, I thought you were going to ask a question.
I was going to ask if we can finish now.
Oh, sure.
No, that seemed like a good place to end. Thank you very much, everybody, for coming. Big round of applause for Jemma and Charlotte. Hang around and have a drink for half an hour if you like. Gemma's going to listen to everybody's music if you've brought your headphones.
Gemma's email address is up on that now.
And our next event is on June the 21st, and that's TikTok. Oh. So there you go. Thanks again.